When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I have always believed that places remember, not the way people remember, with names and birthdays and photographs, but with something slower, more stubborn, a wall that refuses to let go of a stain, a stair that creaks in the same tone as though sighing each time a foot touches it, a window that will not open fully no matter how hard you pull, as if it resists the wind for a reason only it knows. Places keep secrets. They whisper them, sometimes only to those foolish enough or curious enough to listen. That belief, more than my career or any scholarly pursuit, is what led me to China. I am, on paper, a researcher of folklore. At 34, I had managed to build a modest reputation back in New England. I gave lectures that most students tolerated more than enjoyed. I published essays in journals so obscure that only colleagues with the same obsessions ever read them. My subject was always the same: stories that refuse to die, the myths, the rumors, the urban legends that slip into our lives and outlast us. But beneath the surface of my academic curiosity was something less respectable: obsession. I was chasing the feeling of being unsettled, of standing at the thin border between truth and nightmare. For years, I had hunted legends across books and whispered anecdotes, hoping that one day a story would prove heavier than paper. When the fellowship invitation arrived, an exchange at a university in eastern China, I accepted at once. My colleagues congratulated me, imagining that I wanted to explore centuries of myth and oral tradition. They weren't wrong, but they didn't know the real reason. I had already heard whispers about a particular legend, one that gnawed at me in a way others hadn't. It was the story of a dormitory with no 13th floor. Officially, the building stopped at 12. The elevator buttons skipped neatly to 14. The blueprints showed nothing missing. Yet scattered across alumni networks and late-night forums were tales from former students. They spoke of riding the elevator at midnight, of pressing a certain sequence, of doors sliding open to reveal a corridor that should not exist. The hallway, they said, smelled faintly of incense, though no offerings had been burned there in decades. They spoke of footsteps echoing behind them, though no one ever arrived. And they warned, always in hushed words, that if you stepped out, if you truly set foot onto that forbidden level, you would not return. Many dismissed it as an initiation tale, a ghost story to frighten newcomers. Yet the details disturbed me. Different voices, separated by years, describing the same shadows. I could not leave it alone. It was on my second week at the university that I found myself in the map room. The place was hidden behind the main library, accessible through a narrow hallway that smelled of chalk and damp stone. A faded sign in Chinese characters hung above the doorframe. Inside, a single bulb dangled from the ceiling, humming faintly, casting a light too weak for comfort. Dust clung to the air like ash, turning every breath into a dry swallow. Cabinets lined the walls, tall as coffins, their drawers labeled in brushstrokes long faded. I was told this room stored the university's old blueprints, maps, and architectural plans. That was what I had come for. I was alone, or at least I believed I was. There is something about library silence that deceives you. It is never complete. It lives, it breathes. The wood shifts, a page rustles, the distant echo of a guard's footsteps 2 floors away. In that silence, every sound feels amplified, and every absence feels like someone just stopped speaking. I pulled drawer after drawer, handling brittle paper with care, maps of the city in the 1950s, when trams rattled through narrow streets. Blueprints of the library extension, stamped 1972, with penciled corrections that no one had erased. Plans of dormitories long since demolished. None of it was what I sought. And then I found it. A folded sheet, its edges frayed, stamped with the year 1968. The label read simply, Dormitory Number 4. I spread it open on the desk. The ink had faded, but the lines remained clear. 12 floors, neatly arranged. Stairwells placed with perfect symmetry. I traced the vertical lines with my finger, floor by floor. And that was when I noticed it. Between the 12th and 14th levels, a smudge. Not a proper drawing, but a faint echo, as if lines had once been there, erased in haste. A ghostly shadow of something half erased, half remembered. I leaned closer, eyes straining in the dim light. The paper smelled of mildew, old glue, and something else. Something sharp, almost acrid. A faint trace of incense, the kind that lingers after a ritual long forgotten. I held my breath listening, and then I heard it. A whisper. It brushed my ear, soft, almost imperceptible. Not the creak of a cabinet, not the hum of the light. A voice, a word. 13. The syllable slithered into the silence and froze there. My hand stiffened on the blueprint. My heart thudded once, hard, as if my body itself recoiled. I turned. The room was empty. The bulbs swayed slightly overhead, but the air was still. 13. This time the whisper seemed to come from inside the cabinets themselves, from between the stacks of paper that had not been touched in decades. My throat tightened. For a moment I wondered if I had only imagined it, if my own obsession had conjured the sound. But the silence that followed was too heavy, pressing against me as though the air itself waited for a reply. I folded the map with trembling hands and slid it into my satchel. My mind raced with explanations, fatigue, stress, the tricks of a foreign language whispering through the walls. Yet deep inside I knew. Places remember. That night back in my dormitory on the 12th floor, I could not sleep. The air felt stale, the walls too thin. The ticking of the radiator became a heartbeat I could not escape. I lay awake, replaying the whisper again and again. 13. The number ceased to be a number. It became a pulse, a summons. I thought of the students whose stories I had gathered. They all spoke with the same unease, their voices cracking when they described the elevator doors sliding open at midnight. Curiosity, they said, was the first step, and often the last. But obsession is a stubborn thing. It wears down caution the way water wears down stone. I had come here for this very reason, to step across the line where folklore bleeds into reality. And now the line was before me. Near midnight, I found myself pacing the corridor outside my room. The lights buzzed faintly above, their glow a sickly yellow. The hall was deserted. Even the night guard seemed absent. At the far end stood the elevator, its doors shut, its metal surface reflecting the dim glow like a pool of dark water. I felt the whisper still clinging to my ear, following me from the map room to here. The elevator waited, and I knew, though I wished I didn't, that this was only the beginning. I used to think midnight was only a number on the clock, a point between one day and the next. But that night, in the dormitory silent hall, I understood it differently. Midnight is not a time. It is a door. The corridor outside my room was deserted. A row of dim bulbs flickered overhead, painting the cracked walls in pale yellow light. The air was stagnant, carrying the faint odor of cleaning fluid that never quite erased the older, deeper scent of mildew. At the far end stood the elevator. Its doors gleamed faintly, reflecting the corridor like a pool of stagnant water. I had read countless student accounts describing this very moment. The approach, the silence, the way the elevator seemed to wait with a kind of breathless anticipation. Now walking toward it, I felt the truth of their words. Every step echoed too loudly, as though the hallway itself were hollow. When I reached the doors, I hesitated. My reflection stared back at me. Pale face, weary eyes, satchel still slung over my shoulder as if I had not quite left the map room behind. I pressed the button. The elevator groaned awake. I heard the gears shudder, the cables stir, the dull thrum rising through the shaft like something waking from a dream. The doors parted with a sigh. Inside, the car smelled faintly metallic, tinged with dust and oil. The panel glowed with its familiar sequence of buttons, G, 1 through 12, then 14. The gap where 13 should have been stared at me like a missing tooth. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut with a sound softer than I expected, almost gentle, almost reluctant. The elevator began its slow descent, then stopped at once, waiting. My hand hovered over the buttons. The student stories all mentioned a sequence. Some claimed it was pressing 12 and then 14 together. Others insisted you had to press them in a rhythm, as if knocking on a locked door. Still others warned it wasn't about the numbers at all, it was about intention. I swallowed. My finger pressed 12. The light glowed. Then I pressed 14. For a moment, nothing happened. The elevator hummed, the cable tightened, and the car shivered as though deciding. Then it began to move. The sensation was wrong. Not the smooth rise of ordinary travel, but a lurching, halting motion, as if the car passed through spaces not meant for human passage. My stomach twisted with each jerk. The panel flickered. The light on 12 dimmed. The light on 14 glowed faintly, and then, impossibly, a third light flared between them. A number that was not there before. 13. The bulb glowed with a sickly yellow, pulsing faintly like a living eye. My mouth went dry. I reached out, half in terror, half in inevitability, and touched it. The car shuddered to a stop. The door slid open. What lay beyond was not supposed to exist. A corridor stretched into darkness, longer than it should have been. The walls were lined with faded paint, their surface cracked, peeling. A few weak bulbs hung from the ceiling, but they flickered erratically, as though struggling against some unseen wind. The air smelled of dust, old incense, and something metallic, faintly sour, like the tang of rust or blood diluted in water. For a long moment I stood at the threshold, my body frozen. The elevator hummed behind me, waiting. The corridor breathed before me, silent and endless. I listened. At first there was nothing. Then faintly a sound, the click of wooden shoes on tile, slow, measured, approaching from somewhere unseen. I should have closed the doors. I should have pressed the button for any other floor. Instead, I stepped forward. The air was colder. My skin prickled. The moment my foot touched the ground beyond the threshold, the sound of the elevator behind me seemed to fade, as though I had stepped not just into a hall, but into another layer of the world. The doors remained open, but I knew instinctively, if I turned back, they would not be waiting. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with doors that bore no numbers, only faded marks where plaques had once been. Each door was closed, but from some of them seeped faint traces of light, yellow, wavering like the glow of oil lamps. Others seemed to breathe cold air from beneath their thresholds, and through it all came the sound of the wooden footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, but the hall was empty. Only shadows moved, stretched too long beneath the flickering bulbs. I forced myself to walk. Each step echoed louder than the last, as if the floor itself resented my intrusion. My hand brushed the peeling wall, its texture rough, flaking into my palm like ash. The air thickened the farther I went. At times I thought I smelled incense again, but sharper, as though the smoke was laced with something bitter. The footsteps followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Never visible, always there. My chest tightened. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for the next sound. Then I reached a door that was different from the others. It stood slightly ajar. From within came a faint warmth and the unmistakable scent of tea. I pushed the door open. The room inside was dim, dust clinging to the furniture like shrouds. Beds lined the walls, sheets yellowed with age, but on the desk in the corner sat a porcelain cup, and from that cup rose a faint curl of steam. Fresh. My stomach turned. No one had lived here in decades, and yet the tea was still warm. I stepped back, my heel scraping against the tile. The sound echoed unnaturally loud, bouncing down the corridor, and in the silence that followed, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps had stopped just outside the door. I froze, every nerve screaming. Slowly, trembling, I turned toward the hall. The corridor was empty, but the door, of its own accord, began to close. With a soft click, I was shut inside. The room dimmed, the bulb above flickering, struggling against the darkness that pressed in like water through a crack in glass. And then, from the far corner of the room, I heard the whisper. 13. I cannot say how long I stood there, staring into the dim room, my pulse hammering in my ears. The whisper had coiled through the air, soft yet unmistakable, as though the walls themselves had spoken. 13. The sound did not fade the way ordinary echoes do. It lingered, stretched thin, like a thread tugged tight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I forced myself back into the corridor. The air outside was cooler, almost damp, and yet it carried the same faint trace of incense I had smelled in the map room. The elevator doors behind me were still open, but they looked farther away now, as though the corridor had lengthened while I wasn't looking. A trick of the dim light, I told myself. A trick of nerves. I began to walk. The corridor was lined with doors, identical except for the stains and scratches that marred each surface. Some were marked by deep gouges, as if fingernails or perhaps something sharper had raked across the wood. Others bore faint outlines where metal plaques must once have hung. The numbers, the names, whatever they had been, were gone, stripped away. Yet as I walked, I felt eyes pressing from behind each door. A weight in the air, like an audience holding its breath. I tried not to listen, but the silence magnified everything. The scuff of my shoes on the tile, the whisper of my breath, the faint creak of the ceiling bulb swaying in its socket, and underneath all of it, that steady rhythm, tap, tap, tap. Wooden soles striking the floor, sometimes near, sometimes far, always just out of sight. I told myself not to look back. The instinct clawed at me, but I resisted. To look was to invite, and some things are better left uninvited. A few doors ahead, I noticed a faint light leaking from beneath the threshold. I hesitated, then bent slightly, peering at the crack. The glow was not electric. It was softer, warmer, like the light of a lantern burning oil. For a moment I smelled wax and smoke, mingled with the bitter trace of herbs. The light flickered once, then went dark. I straightened, heart pounding. Further down the hall, a new detail caught my eye. The walls here were decorated, or had been once. Frames hung crookedly, glass cracked, wood warped with age. I stepped closer, squinting at the faded photographs within. They were class portraits, rows of young faces, smiling stiffly at the camera. The hairstyles, the clothing. Judging from them, these photos must have been taken in the late 1960s or early 1970s. Some faces were blurred with time, others obscured by mildew. Yet one detail chilled me. In each photo, one figure was missing. A blank silhouette, not from fading or damage, but from deliberate removal. A clean, sharp void where a student should have stood. My stomach knotted. I moved to the next frame. Again, a row of students. Again, one figure cut cleanly away. The blankness drew the eye, almost more alive than the faces around it. And as I studied them, I realized something worse. The missing figures were not random. They were always in the same place, the far right of the front row. Always one absent, always in that seat. My skin prickled. Again, I stepped back, trying to shake the thought, but the air seemed thicker here, the silence heavier. From the corner of my eye, movement. I turned sharply. A curtain hung over a small window halfway down the hall, its fabric yellowed with age. For the briefest moment, I saw a shape behind it, a silhouette, tall and still. I blinked and it was gone. The curtain swayed gently, though no breeze touched it. I took another step forward. The footsteps resumed. Tap, tap, tap. This time they were closer. I felt the vibration through the tile beneath my feet, as though someone were walking in perfect rhythm with me, one pace behind. I spun. The corridor was empty, but the photographs on the wall, they had changed. Where before there had been only blank silhouettes, now faint outlines of faces pressed against the glass, as though emerging from beneath the paper itself. Eyes blurred, mouths twisted, all watching me. I stumbled back, heart lurching. My shoulder brushed a door. It opened. Not fully, just enough to creak wide, revealing a sliver of darkness within. From the gap drifted the smell of tea, warm, bitter, unmistakable. The same scent from before. I should not have looked, but I did. Inside the room was a desk, its surface layered with dust. On it sat another cup of tea. The porcelain was cracked, stained, but steam still rose from the liquid, fresh, waiting. I shut the door with trembling hands. The sound echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned, heavy as stone. I stood there paralyzed, my breath shallow. Then slowly, another sound reached me. Not footsteps, not whispers, laughter, soft, high-pitched, the giggle of a child, or something imitating one. It came from deep within the hall, echoing faintly, bouncing against the cracked walls. It rose and fell, playful and cruel all at once. I pressed my back against the wall, every nerve screaming to retreat, to run, to escape this place. But the elevator was nowhere in sight now. The corridor had stretched impossibly long. The doors all looked the same, the photographs all staring. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. The laughter faded. The footsteps did not return, only silence, waiting. And with each door I passed, I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing harder. By the time I reached the end of the hall, my throat was raw from holding back breath. A single door stood there, wider than the others, its wood darker, its handle gleaming faintly as though polished by countless hands. I knew without question that whatever lay beyond was the heart of this place, and I also knew that opening it would mean stepping past the point of return. The silence deepened, pressing in, urging, daring. My hand rose toward the handle, and just before I touched it, the whisper came again. Closer this time, inside the very air I breathed. 13. The handle was cold against my palm. Not the cold of metal untouched for years, but a deeper chill, as though the door itself was exhaling frost. My breath caught, and for a moment I considered turning back, if back even existed anymore. But the whisper still clung to me, and some part of me knew that the only way forward was through. I pushed the door open. The hinges moaned, a long, low cry that made the hair rise on my arms. The room beyond was larger than I expected, its walls receding into shadow, its ceiling lost in darkness. A faint glow seeped from lanterns along the walls. Not electric bulbs, but old paper lanterns, their surfaces mottled with age. Their light flickered unevenly, painting the room in shifting hues of amber and gold. It was a classroom. Rows of desks stretched before me, each scarred with carvings, initials etched by restless hands. Dust coated the wood, but not evenly. Some desks were thick with neglect, while others looked used. The faint impression of fingers traced the surface, as though someone had been sitting there only moments before. I stepped inside. The air was heavy, carrying a blend of chalk dust, incense, and something older, paper left too long in damp air. At the far end of the room, a blackboard loomed, streaked with faint white marks. The chalk drawings had long since faded, yet some words still lingered, half erased, half remembered. I leaned closer, squinting. They weren't lessons. They were names. A list, written in careful columns, each followed by dates. Some of the dates were crossed out. Others were smudged into illegibility. But the first name on the list chilled me. Class 13. The realization came slowly, like water seeping into cloth. This wasn't just a classroom. It was their classroom, the one that was never supposed to exist. On one desk near the front lay a notebook. The cover was warped, its edges curled from damp. Yet the pages inside were surprisingly clear, the ink dark and legible. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, a student's hand. September 12th. The teacher told us again not to speak of this floor. But how can we forget when we live here every day? The stairs don't reach us, the maps deny us. Yet we breathe, eat, and write exams like everyone else. Do they think we are blind? I turned the page. October 3rd. Another student vanished last night. He went to the elevator alone. They say he was tired of the silence, tired of the whispers. The teacher only erased his name from the board. But I still see his chair, empty and waiting. How many more before it is my turn? My throat tightened. Further pages carried the same hand, though shakier, more frantic as time passed. November 1st. The doors no longer lead outside. We try, but they open to more hallways, more rooms. Sometimes I think the building itself is folding us deeper inside. Even when we scream, no one hears. Only the sound of shoes in the corridor. Tap, tap, tap. I shut the book, my pulse racing. The room was silent, yet I felt the presence of voices layered within it. A chorus of students who had once written, spoken, laughed here, and then faintly I heard them. Not whispers this time, but the rustle of pages turning, the creak of chairs shifting. I looked up. The classroom was no longer empty. Figures sat at the desks, their outlines faint, translucent, their heads bent over books, their hands moved pens across paper. Not one of them raised their eyes to me. The air shimmered faintly around them, like heat rising from pavement. My chest tightened. I wanted to speak, to call out, but the sound caught in my throat. I could only watch. One student, seated nearest to me, shifted slightly. His features flickered into clarity for a moment. Sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, lips pressed in concentration. Then, as quickly as they had formed, they blurred again, dissolving into shadow. I backed away, my shoes scraping against the floor. None of the students reacted. They wrote endlessly, filling notebooks that would never be read. On the teacher's desk lay another book, larger, bound in dark leather. I felt drawn to it, though every nerve screamed against the impulse. With hesitant steps, I approached. The cover bore no title. The clasp was broken. Inside, the pages were filled with neat calligraphy, older than the notebook, more formal. This was not a student's diary, it was a ledger. Each page listed names, dates, and brief notes. Transferred, dismissed, erased, dozens of names, all under the heading Class 13. And then the final entry, written in bold strokes that pressed deep into the paper. All forgotten. Do not record. Do not return. The lantern light flickered violently. A wind stirred, though no window stood open. The air filled with a dry, papery sound, as though countless pages were being turned at once. The students had stopped writing. Slowly, one by one, their heads lifted. Eyes, dark, hollow, endless, turned toward me. My hands froze on the ledger. The air thickened, pressing down like water. Their gaze was not hateful, not kind, but something far worse, expectant. As though I had stepped into the role of the absent figure in the photographs, the missing student. One of the figures rose from his desk. His form wavered, but his footsteps struck the floor with weight. Tap, tap, tap. I stumbled back. The ledger slipped from my grasp, falling open on the desk. The final page turned of its own accord, the ink shifting as though freshly written. A new line appeared beneath the last entry. One more has joined us. The figure was close now, its face resolving into pale clarity. The corners of its mouth trembled, as though about to speak. I shut my eyes. When I opened them, the classroom was empty once more. Dust, silence, stillness. Only the ledger remained on the desk, its page blank save for faint smudges of ink. And yet the air carried the echo of their presence, a reminder that they had never truly left. I turned and fled, back into the corridor, the sound of my footsteps clashing against the memory of theirs. Behind me, the lanterns flickered one last time. Ahead, in the distance, a faint glow appeared, red, wavering, beckoning. A lantern, swaying in the dark. The glow was faint at first, a soft pulse at the end of the corridor, so dim I thought my eyes were tricking me. But with every step I took, it sharpened, its color growing richer until I could make it out clearly. A lantern, swaying gently, its paper shade dyed a deep crimson. It hung suspended in the dark without string or hook, as though the air itself had chosen to cradle it. Its light was not steady. It flickered like a dying candle, but each flare sent shadows rippling along the walls in strange, twisting patterns. I stood rooted for a long moment, heart hammering. In the silence, I thought I could hear it, the faint hiss of flame-eating oil, the dry crackle of paper straining against heat. But lanterns don't burn forever. Why was this one still alive, here, in a corridor that should not exist? I should have turned away. Every instinct told me the glow was a lure. Yet the pull was stronger. My feet moved, slow and unwilling, carrying me toward it. The closer I drew, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath unfurling like smoke. The lantern swayed in rhythm with my steps, as though guiding me forward, deeper into the heart of this impossible floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound again, footsteps echoing mine. But this time another sound joined them. Boom, faint, distant, a hollow drum beat that resonated in my chest. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythm was deliberate, measured, like the beat of a funeral procession. Each strike carried with it a tremor of sorrow, an ancient weight that settled into my bones. I rounded a corner, and the corridor stretched longer still. Along the walls, new decorations appeared. White strips of cloth fluttered from the ceiling. Paper talismans, their ink faded but legible, were pasted on doors. Some bore the characters for peace, others for silence, but the edges were torn, the seals broken, and always ahead, the lantern swayed. As I passed one door, I caught sight of something that froze me. The wood was cracked, and through the fissure, I glimpsed movement. A figure seated cross-legged on the floor, its body draped in white mourning cloth. The head turned slightly, but there was no face, only a blur, as if time itself refused to remember it. I stumbled back, pulse racing, but when I looked again, the cracks showed only darkness. The drumbeat grew louder. Boom, boom, boom. I pressed on, following the lantern. My shoes scuffed against the tile, the sound sharp against the rhythm of the unseen drum. The walls around me seemed narrower, closing in, until I felt as though I were walking in a tunnel lined with shadows. At last the corridor opened into a wider space, a common hall perhaps, or what had once been one. The ceiling here arched high, lost in shadow. The lantern floated into the center of the room and came to a stop, swaying slowly as though waiting for me. The space was filled with chairs, arranged in neat rows facing a low platform at the far end. The chairs were old, their wood chipped, but each bore signs of use, indentations, scratches, faint stains. On the platform stood a wooden stand, draped in cloth that might once have been white but was now yellowed with age. And resting on the stand was a drum. It was small, its surface taut, its rim painted with faded red patterns. Yet when the sound came again, deep and resonant, it was far too loud for such a modest instrument. The beat rolled through the room, vibrating in the walls, echoing in my chest. I stood frozen, every hair on my body standing on end. Then I noticed the chairs. They were not empty. Figures sat in them, row upon row, their bodies draped in white mourning garments. Some wore tall paper hats, their faces obscured by veils. Others bowed their heads, their hands folded in their laps. None moved, none breathed, but the weight of their presence pressed against me with suffocating force. The drumbeat quickened. Boom, boom, boom. My throat tightened. I felt as though I had stumbled into a funeral that had never ended, a procession trapped in eternal repetition, and the red lantern, its glow pulsing, was the only witness that remained. Then the figures moved, not all at once, but slowly, one by one, their heads lifted. Veils shifted. Though blurred and indistinct, I felt their eyes lock onto me. 1,000 pounds of silence bore down, urging me to bow, to join them, to take my place among the mourners. The lantern flared, its red glow staining the room, and in that instant I saw more than I wished. On the platform beside the drum lay a coffin. Its wood was dark, almost black, and symbols were carved deep into its surface. The lid was sealed, but faint cracks ran along its edges, as though something inside had pushed against it. The drumbeat stopped. The silence was worse. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat, frantic and unsteady. The mourners remained still, their veils trembling as though with breath, and the lantern, its flame guttering, tilted toward the coffin. A sound rose from within, not the scrape of wood, not the crack of nails. A sigh, long, weary, mournful. The coffin shuddered. Dust fell from its lid. The mourners bowed their heads once more, as if in reverence. I could not breathe. My body screamed to run, yet my legs refused to obey. The sigh rose again, deeper this time, carrying with it a whisper of words I could not understand. The lantern flickered wildly, its paper wrinkling as though caught in a sudden wind. Then, without warning, its flame went out. Darkness swallowed the hall. I was alone. Or perhaps I was not. Somewhere in the blackness, I heard it again. 3 steady beats. Boom, boom, boom. And then silence. When the lantern's flame vanished, the silence pressed in like a tide. The hall, the mourners, the coffin, everything had dissolved into blackness. I stood frozen, ears straining for the drum, for footsteps, for anything. At first there was nothing. Then came the sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was faint, deliberate, unmistakable. The sound of chalk against slate. Somewhere ahead of me in the dark, a hand was writing. I forced my legs to move, each step echoing far too loudly. The darkness thickened, swallowing sound, swallowing breath. Yet the scratching grew sharper, guiding me. I followed it like a blind man chasing the toll of a distant bell. Gradually, a shape emerged from the dark. A blackboard, freestanding in the void, its surface gleaming faintly with ghostly light. And before it stood a figure. He was tall, thin, draped in a robe that might once have been black, but had faded to gray. His shoulders stooped as though weighed down by decades of study. In his right hand, he held a piece of chalk, moving steadily across the board. I stopped a few feet away. My breath caught. It was a teacher, not fully solid, not entirely shadow. His outline shimmered, wavering between presence and absence. Yet the motion of his hand was precise, confident, as though he had taught this lesson countless times before. The chalk scraped across the board. Letters formed, though the language was strange, Ancient characters, half Chinese, half something older. They twisted as I looked at them, never settling, yet their meaning pressed into my mind without need of translation. Memory is a burden. To be forgotten is mercy. To remember is to pay the price. The chalk snapped. A fragment fell to the floor, vanishing before it touched the ground. The teacher reached calmly into his sleeve and drew another piece, continuing the lesson. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my throat locked. My voice felt like it would shatter the fragile silence. Instead, I whispered, "Who are you?" The teacher paused. His head tilted slightly, though he did not look at me. His face remained turned toward the board, hidden in shadow. For a moment, I thought he had not heard. Then softly he spoke. His voice was low, resonant, carrying the cadence of one who had lectured for years. Yet it was not directed at me. "Attendance will be taken," he murmured. "No one leaves until the lesson is complete." My stomach knotted. The words were not addressed to me, yet I felt their weight settle over me like chains. He resumed writing. "Those who seek what should be forgotten will inherit the silence." The chalk line trailed downward, trembling. His hands shook, his shoulders quivering as though under sudden strain. For the first time, I sensed exhaustion in him, an endless weariness etched into his movements. I gathered what courage I had left. "Are you the teacher of class 13? The hand froze. Chalk pressed against slate, squealing with sharp resistance. The silence that followed was suffocating. At last, the teacher's head turned, slowly, painfully, as though he had not looked at anyone in 100 years. His face was pale, almost featureless at first, skin blurred by shadow. Then piece by piece, detail emerged. A lined brow, hollow cheeks, eyes sunk deep into their sockets, dark and endless. Those eyes fixed on me. My chest constricted. It felt like staring into a well with no bottom. And then he spoke. "You're late." The chalk dropped from his hand, striking the board with a sound that rang far too loud. He stepped back, surveying the empty rows of desks that were not there, speaking as if to a full classroom. "Page 43. Begin reading." I turned and my blood ran cold. The classroom had returned. Desks filled the void once more, and at each sat a student, head bent, pages rustling. The same faces I had seen before, blurred yet undeniably present, and among them, one desk stood empty, the one nearest to the front. The teacher's hand gestured toward it, slow and certain. My legs trembled. The emptiness of that seat yawned at me like a pit. I shook my head, whispering, "No, I don't belong here." The teacher's gaze did not waver. His voice dropped, soft as dust settling on stone. "You were always here." The students turned their heads in unison, dozens of blurred eyes fixed on me. The air filled with the rustle of paper, pages turning endlessly, pens scratching without pause. I stumbled back, but the floor beneath me seemed to shift, dragging me closer to the desk. My hands scraped across its surface, smooth, warm, as though freshly touched. On the board, chalk moved again, though the teacher did not hold it. Words etched themselves across the slate in jagged lines. Attend, remember, disappear. The letters glowed faintly, their light bleeding into the air. I tore myself away from the desk, heart pounding. "What happened to you?" I shouted, the words bursting out at last. "Why are you here?" The teacher's lips parted. For the first time, his voice cracked, trembling with something raw. "I stayed when I should have left." His eyes burned, two coals sinking in ash. "I taught when no one remained. I remembered when memory was forbidden, and so I am bound." He raised a trembling hand, pointing directly at me. "And so will you." The classroom flickered, wavering between presence and absence. The students dissolved, then reappeared, their outlines breaking apart like mist. The blackboard cracked down the center, chalk shattering into dust. The teacher stepped forward. His body wavered, fading, but his eyes remained, fixed on mine. Then as suddenly as he had appeared, He was gone. The classroom vanished. I stood alone in a bare corridor, breath ragged, hands trembling. The only evidence of what I had seen lay at my feet, a fragment of chalk, pale and sharp against the dark floor. It rolled once, twice, and stopped. Behind me the silence returned, heavy, expectant. Ahead, faintly, a shimmer of glass caught my eye. A doorway, its surface reflective, a mirror. And in it, I thought I saw myself, but not as I should be. The chalk fragment lay silent at my feet, pale against the darkness. I bent to pick it up, but my hand froze halfway. For just an instant, I thought it had moved. Not rolled, shifted, as if pulled by something unseen. I straightened quickly, forcing my gaze away. That was when I saw it. The mirror. At the end of the corridor, mounted where no door should have been, a tall rectangle gleamed faintly in the dark. Its surface caught the thin light of the void, shining with a glassy shimmer that had no place in this suffocating silence. I felt my pulse quicken. Mirrors have always unnerved me, not for their surface, but for what might lurk behind them. Here, on this impossible floor, that fear sharpened into certainty. Still, my feet moved. I drew closer, each step loud in the hush. The mirror was taller than I, framed in black wood carved with characters I could not read. The glass was old and perfect, its surface rippling faintly like water disturbed by breath. And in it, I saw myself. At first, I stood in the reflection exactly as I stood in the corridor, pale, trembling, eyes wide. My reflection's lips moved in time with mine, my breath fogging the surface when I leaned close. For one moment, it seemed harmless, ordinary, but then the reflection lingered. I turned my head slightly. It did not. My blood ran cold. The reflection stared back, eyes locked on mine, unblinking. Its lips curled faintly, almost imperceptibly, into something that was not a smile, but a knowing. And then the glass rippled, distorting the image. Another version of me appeared, this one older, his hair streaked with gray, his face gaunt, as if drained of years. His hands trembled as he reached toward the glass, fingertips leaving smears of shadow across the surface. I stumbled back, but the image grew sharper, crowding against the pane. Behind him, faint outlines shifted. Desks, students, the teacher's hollow gaze. All reflected, all contained. The glass rippled again. A third self emerged. Younger this time. Too young. A boy of perhaps 12, wide-eyed, his lips moving soundlessly as though reciting a lesson. His eyes darted to mine with sudden intensity, and I felt an ache, an echo of memories I had buried long ago. "No," I whispered. The boy's mouth shaped the same word, but in his eyes there was pleading. The mirror trembled, its surface vibrating with a low hum. The corridor seemed to stretch and contract, pulling me closer. I turned, desperate to run, but the hall behind me had changed. No walls, no ceiling, only darkness stretching endlessly, the silence heavier than stone. The mirror was all that remained, and it wanted me. I faced it again, chest tight. More versions of myself appeared now, layered one over the other. Some bore scars I did not have. Some were cloaked in black robes. One had no face at all, only smooth skin where features should be. They pressed against the glass, overlapping, their mouths moving. At first I heard nothing, then slowly sounds seeped through. Whispers, faint, fragmented, overlapping like pages shuffled in the dark. "You left us. Remember what you did. We are still waiting." The words burrowed under my skin. Each voice carried the cadence of my own, yet twisted, aged, cracked. It was as if every choice I had not made, every life I might have lived, had found form here. Trapped, hungry. The boy's reflection pushed to the front again, his hands flattened against the glass. and for the first time I heard him clearly. "Come back." The words were small, fragile, but they struck like thunder. My chest constricted. Against my will, my hand rose. Fingers brushed the cold surface of the mirror. It yielded. Not solid, not glass, liquid. The surface rippled outward from my touch, swallowing my reflection's hand in return. The boy's fingers pressed against mine, though there was no barrier between us. Behind him, the other selves moved closer, crowding, their eyes blazing with accusation. Their whispers sharpened, overlapping into a chorus. "Join us. You are already one of us. This is where you belong." The boy's lips parted again. "You forgot our names." The words struck me like ice. Forgotten names. Forgotten faces. Images flared in my mind. Friends long lost. Teachers I could no longer recall. A childhood classroom swallowed by time. I staggered back, shaking my head violently. "No, I didn't forget. The mirror flared with light. For a moment I saw not myself, but the 13th floor as it might have once been. Bright, ordinary, filled with laughter and voices. Students rushing through halls, teachers calling roll, lanterns glowing warm at dusk. And then, just as quickly, the vision collapsed. The glass cracked from corner to corner, fissures running like veins of lightning. Through the cracks, darkness oozed, thick and suffocating. The boy's face twisted, blurred, his eyes hollow. "You already belong here." The other reflections leaned forward, pressing against the cracks, their hands sliding through as though the barrier no longer held. I felt their breath on my skin, cold and rancid. My hand moved on its own. Slowly, inexorably, it pressed against the glass again. This time the mirror pulled. My palm sank deeper, then my wrist. The surface clung like oil, dragging me inch by inch. My reflection, my other self, smiled as though welcoming me home. I struggled, pulling back, but the force was relentless. The whispers rose to a roar, filling the corridor with their overlapping demands. "Remember, repent, return." The glass chilled my skin to the bone. My arm disappeared up to the elbow. My reflection's face merged with mine in the rippling surface, our features overlapping until I could no longer tell which was real. And then, silence. The whispers stopped. The pulling ceased. I was left with my hand pressed flat against solid glass once more. But my reflection did not move. It stood, eyes wide, lips trembling, pounding on the inside of the mirror. It was me, yet trapped, desperate, silent, and I was on the outside, for now. The corridor stretched before me again, ordinary in its impossibility. The mirror loomed behind, its surface faintly glowing. I turned away, heart pounding. But as I walked, the whisper followed me, soft and childlike. "You will come back." The whisper trailed me as I walked, fading and returning like breath against my ear. "You will come back." The corridor stretched long and narrow, lit by nothing yet never entirely dark. I kept my eyes ahead, refusing to look back at the mirror. Every step felt heavier, as if the floor clung to my shoes. Then I heard it, a new sound. Not footsteps, not whispers, chalk. That same dry, brittle scrape I had followed before. Only now it came from all directions, above, below, behind the walls themselves. As if unseen hands were writing ceaselessly, their words echoing through the very bones of the building. I froze. Ahead, faint lines began to form on the wall. At first I thought it was cracks, but no. The lines curved, bent, joined. Letters, names. They stretched across the wall in rows, faint but growing clearer. White chalk scrawled with urgency, jagged yet deliberate. A list of students, perhaps, each name written in tight columns, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. I moved closer. Dust clung to my fingers as I touched the wall. The chalk smeared beneath my touch, staining my skin with ghostly powder. Some names were clear, sharp as if freshly written. Others had been half erased, smeared into illegibility. Still others were gouged through with deep scratches, leaving only scars in the plaster. And then there were the empty spaces, lines where a name should have been, but was gone. My throat tightened. The silence thickened, pressing against my ears until I thought I might scream. But then the whispers returned. They came not from behind me, nor from the void, but from the wall itself. The names breathed. Don't forget me. Call me back. We were here. We were here. I staggered back, heart pounding. The chalk marks pulsed faintly with pale light, as if alive. And then I saw it. My name, written among the rows, faint but undeniable. Each letter curled with dreadful precision, spelling me out. Yet the lines were smudged, blurred, as though being rubbed away by an unseen hand. I stared, shaking my head violently. No, no, that's not me. That can't be. The wall trembled. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. More names smeared themselves into nothing before my eyes, vanishing into blankness. With each disappearance, a cry echoed faintly, a voice lost forever, swallowed by silence. The whispers grew frantic. Shh, remember us. Don't let them erase. Your turn, your turn. The chalk in my hand, the fragment I had picked up earlier, grew warm. Too warm. I dropped it, and it rolled toward the wall of names as if drawn, vanishing into the cracks. Then the writing changed. No longer white chalk, black now, thick wet strokes smeared across the wall, dripping like ink or blood. A new hand was writing, not mine. The strokes curved slowly, almost tenderly, and the letters formed again. My name, this time not fading, but burning itself into the wall with awful permanence. The blackness bled into the plaster, veins spreading outward like rot. I stumbled back, choking on the metallic stench that filled the air. The sound of writing was everywhere, 1,000 chalks scraping at once, deafening. Stop, I cried, though my voice broke against the din. The black hand continued, line after line. My name repeated over and over, filling entire rows, each one darker, thicker, until it seemed the wall itself would split beneath their weight. And then the voices changed. No longer whispers. They spoke as one. You cannot leave what remembers you. The corridor shook, the wall convulsed, and the names writhed as though alive. Some burst free, letters scattering like insects. Others bled into one another, merging into grotesque shapes. My name pulsed brightest of all. Its letters bulged outward, swelling, twisting, until they formed a gaping hole in the wall. Darkness yawned within, and from that darkness, hands reached out. Dozens, pale, thin, trembling. Fingers grasping at the air, clawing toward me. Their nails scraped the stone, leaving trails of white and black chalk. Voices poured out, layered, desperate. Say my name, say my name. Remember me, remember me. Don't forget, don't let it end. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, but the sound was inside my head. The air vibrated with it, the weight unbearable. Then above the chaos, one voice cut through. A child's, clear, gentle, familiar. It spoke my name, not with anger, not with accusation, but with sorrow. The sound hollowed me out. I looked up, tears stinging my eyes. For just a heartbeat, I saw a face in the darkness. Round, innocent, eyes wide with longing. Someone I should have remembered. Someone I had once known. And then the face dissolved. The darkness surged forward. The wall convulsed, splitting wide. The list of names collapsed into nothingness, replaced by a single immense character drawn in fire-black strokes. One word. Forget. The ground lurched beneath me. My body was pulled toward the chasm, the hands grasping, the names wailing. I clawed at the floor, fingernails tearing against stone. but the force dragged me closer, closer, until the blackness swallowed everything. And in that final instant, before the void consumed me, a new sound pierced the chaos. A match being struck, a flame blooming small and defiant. Light, candlelight. And then, silence. When the darkness swallowed me, I thought it was the end. No sound, no weight, no breath. Just silence so absolute it pressed like a stone against my chest. Then, light. A thin, wavering glow pierced the black. My eyes stung as it spread, revealing walls that were not walls, but curtains of shadow trembling in the faint illumination. Candles, 13 of them. They burned in a circle on the ground, their flames tall and strangely still, as though no air existed here. Wax pooled at their bases but never spilled, each drop suspended in motion, frozen mid-fall. And I was at the center. The floor beneath me was marked with symbols drawn in chalk, ash, and something darker. Circles within circles, lines intersecting like a spider's web. Some symbols I recognized, fragments of Chinese characters, half-erased talismans, patterns I had once seen carved into temple walls. Others were unrecognizable, twisted shapes that seemed to writhe when I stared too long. The air smelled of wax, smoke, and faintly, blood. Around me sat figures, not solid, not entirely human. Shapes of shadow, faintly lit by the candle glow, their outlines blurring as if made of smoke. Some sat cross-legged, hands folded. Others leaned forward, heads bowed, lips moving. They were chanting, low, hushed, overlapping, a rhythm without melody, a drone without end. At first the words were foreign, incomprehensible. Then slowly they began to take form. Names. They were reciting names, one after another, whispered like prayers. Some I recognized from the wall I had seen, the forgotten list etched in chalk. Others were unfamiliar, yet they shivered through me with uncanny weight, as though they should have meant something. And then, my own, spoken once, soft yet clear. Every figure raised their head when it was spoken, and every candle flickered. I shuddered, clutching my arms around myself. The chant continued, a ceaseless tide of remembrance. With each name, a candle flame swayed. When the name faded, the flame steadied, until one name was spoken, and a candle went out. The flame vanished with a faint hiss. Darkness rushed in to claim the space where it had burned, and the figure closest to it dissolved. Not faded, not vanished. Torn apart, shredded into smoke that was sucked into the ground. The others did not pause. The chanting continued, relentless. I could not breathe. These were not prayers, they were bindings. The candles were not symbols. They were vessels. Each flame tethered a soul, held it here, within this impossible 13th floor, and I was inside their circle. I stood unsteadily, my knees weak. The figures turned toward me in unison. Their faces, if they had faces, were featureless, blank planes of shadow with only faint indentations where eyes might be. One leaned forward. Its voice, though quiet, filled the chamber. You are remembered. The words chilled me deeper than the darkness ever had. I shook my head violently. No, I don't belong here. I don't. But they answered in chorus. You are remembered. Every candle flared. The symbols on the floor burned brighter, glowing with red light. The air thickened, pulsing like a heartbeat. I tried to step back, but my foot snagged on something. Looking down, I saw another circle etched within the greater pattern, smaller, tighter, drawn just around where I stood. I had not stepped into it. It had been waiting, waiting for me. The chanting shifted. No longer names, now words. Ancient broken syllables that rasped like dry leaves. The rhythm grew faster, the sound harsher. One of the shadow figures reached forward. From the air it drew a thin taper of wax. The end caught fire without touch, burning with a flame that glowed black instead of gold. It placed the candle at the edge of my circle, and on the floor beside it, a name carved itself in ash. Mine. The candlelight wavered, casting long fingers of shadow across the ground. The figures bent lower, voices weaving into a pattern that made the very air hum. I watched the black flame tremble. I wanted to blow it out, to crush it beneath my foot, but I could not move. My body was rigid, bound by the web of symbols. Then a sound tore through the chant. A hiss. One of the other candles sputtered, its flame shrinking. The shadows around it wavered. The figure bound to it shivered violently, its form breaking into pieces. A cry escaped its formless mouth, half scream, half prayer. The flame died. Darkness swallowed that corner of the circle. The figure convulsed once more, then collapsed inward, sucked into nothing. Gone. The chant faltered, not broken, but shaken. The remaining figures leaned closer to their own flames, as though guarding them with silent devotion, and I understood. Each candle was a life, each name a tether. When the flame died, the soul was lost, erased, forgotten, consumed. I stared at my candle, its black flame twisting like smoke, and it wavered, just slightly. The figures turned toward me again, slowly, one by one. Their blank faces leaned close, and I heard the whisper like a single voice. "Keep it burning." I shook my head violently. "I don't want this. I don't want—" The black flame bent low, flickering as though caught by a breath. For an instant, I thought it would go out. Relief and terror tangled in me. But then it straightened, stronger, taller. The shadows swayed. Their voices deepened. "You are bound." The chamber shook. Wax spilled upward instead of down. The air filled with the acrid tang of burnt incense. The walls of shadow leaned inward, pressing closer, tighter. And I understood the final cruelty of the ritual. It was not the forgotten who vanished. It was those whose flames died. Those who were erased not by neglect, but by the ritual itself. The 13th floor was not a place. It was a circle, a binding, and I had been written into it. The black flame trembled again. Each flicker felt like my heartbeat, each sway like a gasp of breath. If it went out, I would be gone. Not dead. Worse, forgotten. The figures leaned closer still, their whispers pressed against my skin like cold fingers. "Keep it burning, or you will be nothing." And in the stillness that followed, I realized something far worse. It wasn't the flame that was fading. It was me. The circle of candles dissolved, fading like breath on glass. The floor beneath me solidified, the chalk lines sinking back into stone. For a moment, I thought the ritual had ended, that perhaps I had been released. But when I lifted my head, I was no longer in the chamber. I was in a classroom. Long wooden desks stretched before me, scarred with carved initials and old ink stains. Dust floated in the air like snow, disturbed by no breeze. At the front stood a blackboard, its surface cracked, streaked with old chalk smears. The faint smell of damp wood and mildew clung to the air, mingled with something sharper, like burned incense and iron. I knew, though I had never been here before, that this room belonged to the 13th floor. The silence was unbearable. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered in my throat. The air felt too thick, as though it swallowed sound before it could form. Then came the sound I dreaded most. Chalk, a slow, deliberate stroke against slate. My eyes snapped to the board. There was someone there, tall, thin, his posture rigid. He wore an old-fashioned changshan, a teacher's robe, long and flowing, its fabric the color of dusk. The garment hung too loosely, as though draped over a frame too narrow for flesh. He did not turn. His hand moved with unnatural precision, dragging a piece of chalk across the blackboard. Each line was excruciatingly slow, the screech setting my teeth on edge. At last, he finished a character and stepped aside. It was a name, not mine, but I knew it. One of the names whispered in the ritual, one of the students whose candle had extinguished. The chalk scratched again. Another name, and another. Each stroke was exact, without hesitation, as if the hand remembered what the mind had forgotten. I forced my legs to move, shuffling forward down the aisle between the rows of desks. My footsteps sounded muffled, swallowed by the dust-heavy air. Closer now, I could see him more clearly. His head was slightly bowed, yet something about it was wrong. Too still, too smooth. When he finally turned, I understood. There was no face. Where features should have been, eyes, nose, mouth, there was only emptiness. A hollow mask of flesh stretched across a skull, blank as plaster. Yet somehow, impossibly, I felt his gaze. I felt him watching me. I stumbled back, a gasp escaping before I could stop it. The faceless teacher lifted the chalk again. Without a mouth, without a voice, he taught by writing. This time the word was not a name. It was death, written again and again, across every inch of the board, until the surface seemed to scream with repetition. The strokes grew harsher, gouging the slate, chalk snapping but never breaking. The sound filled my skull, each squeal a knife against bone. I clapped my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me. The teacher stepped back. The board was covered now, every inch filled with the word. Yet as I stared, the words twisted, letters bending, characters collapsing until they reshaped into something else. My name, written once, then twice, then 100 times, covering the entire board. I shook my head violently. "Stop! Please stop!" The chalk fell still, and then, impossibly, the faceless head tilted, as though curious. He raised the chalk once more. This time he wrote slowly, deliberately. Each letter dragged long, drawn out, the squeal filling the silence like a scream. When the final line was drawn, I read the words with a sinking heart. "Tomorrow you will teach." The message burned against the slate, brighter than chalk, as though etched with fire. The teacher dropped the chalk. It shattered without sound. He stepped back. Slowly, his hollow face turned toward me, though no eyes guided him. He lifted one hand, thin and pale, bones too long beneath translucent skin. He pointed, not at the board, not at the desks, but at me. The silence pressed tighter, unbearable. I looked away from him, toward the board again. The words had shifted once more. Not just my name now, not just the warning. Rows upon rows of blank spaces, waiting for more names, for students yet to come. And in the center of them all, one word remained fixed, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Teacher. The chalk reformed in his hand. Without eyes, without will, he offered it to me. And I understood the lesson. The ritual was never about survival, it was succession. One candle extinguished, another lit. One student erased, another bound. And when the circle ran its course, the role of the teacher passed on. To me, the chalk trembled in my vision. My hand rose against my will. The faceless figure stepped back, his duty finished. His body unraveled like smoke, leaving only the robe, which fell silently to the floor. The classroom was empty. The chalk was in my hand, and the blackboard waited. The chalk was still in my hand when the silence cracked. It began with the scrape of chairs, the faint scuff of wooden legs dragging across the floor. One sound became many. I froze, my fingers tightening around the chalk until it squealed in protest against the slate. The classroom was filling. Shadows slipped into the desks, row by row. At first they were formless, smudges of smoke that only hinted at bodies. Then slowly, they hardened into silhouettes, students. They sat with eerie precision, backs straight, hands folded on the desk, their faces pale masks turned toward me. None blinked, none breathed. Dozens of eyes, if those voids could be called eyes, fixed themselves upon me. I felt the weight of their gaze pressing against my chest, heavier than the ritual, heavier than the faceless teacher. They were waiting. I shook my head. I'm not your teacher. I can't. My voice cracked, weak in the stagnant air. The students did not respond. Their stillness was more unbearable than anger would have been. Then the chalk in my hand moved, not by my will. My fingers clenched involuntarily, dragging white lines across the blackboard. The sound shrieked, sharp as metal against stone. I wanted to drop it, to let it fall, but my grip was fused to it, as if the chalk had grown into my bones. Stroke by stroke, words appeared. Not lessons, not history or mathematics. Names. Again the names. Each letter a wound, each line a tether. Some I had heard whispered in the candlelit ritual. Some I did not know, but as the chalk scrawled them, a figure in the desks stirred, and I understood. The name called them into being. The classroom filled with whispers, soft as dry leaves rustling. Students whose names were written mouthed the syllables silently, lips parting though no sound came. I wanted to stop. I wanted to scream, but the chalk dragged on, writing faster, harder. When the board was full, the chalk snapped. The broken piece fell, striking the floor with a hollow clink. My hand opened at last, numb, trembling. The students did not move. They only waited, and in the silence I understood. They wanted me to teach. My mouth went dry. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I turned to the board again, staring at the sea of names. They swam before my eyes, letters bending, shifting until they formed sentences. A lesson. I didn't want to read it. Every part of me screamed to turn away, but the silence pressed tighter, suffocating. The rows of faces leaned forward ever so slightly, expectant. The words on the board glowed faintly, demanding breath. I began to read. At first the words came halting, stumbling. Those who step beyond the 13th, the board responded. The letters writhed, reshaping as I spoke. They twisted into images, chalk lines becoming ropes, forming nooses that swung gently. Shadows of feet dangling below them, toes twitching in final silence. I choked, staggered back, but my voice did not stop. It poured from me, steady and strong, as though I had rehearsed these lines for years. Those who forget are forgotten. Those who defy are erased. Those who linger must teach. The images grew darker. Bloodless figures slumped in chairs, mouths open in eternal screams. Ropes gave way to graves, graves gave way to endless corridors, and the sound of the chalkboard screeching became screams trapped within stone. My throat burned. I tried to clamp my mouth shut, but the words forced themselves free, dragged from my lungs by some unseen hand. The students watched, unblinking, absorbing every word. Their shadows lengthened, stretching across the floor toward me like grasping fingers. And then, applause. Soft at first, one pair of hands clapping, then another, then dozens, all in perfect rhythm, a slow, hollow echo that rattled the desks. They were clapping for me, their new teacher. I staggered back, pressing myself against the board. The chalk dust clung to my palms like ash. No, I won't do this. The applause stopped. The silence was worse. Slowly, every head turned toward the back of the classroom. I followed their gaze. There, in the last row, one desk sat empty. Its surface was clean, untouched by dust or scratches, as though it had been waiting. Waiting for someone. The silence deepened, pressing like water around me. I felt their expectation, not for me, for whoever would sit there. And as I stared at that empty desk, my stomach turned cold, because I felt it. A presence, faint, hovering just beyond the veil of the room. Not one of them, not yet. Someone else listening, watching, someone outside the story. The lesson was not for the dead, it was for the living, for you. I looked back at the board. My name had been erased. In its place, chalk scratched slowly across the slate. Though no hand held it, a new word emerged. Student. The empty desk waited, and for the first time I realized the cruelest truth of the 13th floor. It never ran out of pupils. The chalk fell from my hand. The students remained still, their hollow faces turned toward the back of the classroom, where that single empty desk waited. I could no longer bear the weight of their silence. The walls pressed inward, the dust grew heavier, and I felt the room closing around me like a coffin. I staggered back, searching for the door. My hand found a knob, old brass corroded by years unseen. When I pulled, the door gave way without resistance. Beyond it stretched a corridor. I stepped into the hall, eager for air, but the classroom did not vanish. When I looked over my shoulder, the door was still ajar, the rows of unmoving students watching me from within. Their faces were pale moons in the dimness, their eyes pools without light. I turned away quickly. The corridor stretched impossibly long, lined with doors, each unmarked, each the same. Lamps hung at intervals along the ceiling, their glass cracked, their light weak and sickly. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps, though no other sound accompanied me. I walked and walked. The corridor bent, twisted, but never ended. At times I thought I saw the glow of an exit sign far ahead, flickering red like a dying heartbeat. Each time I tried to hurry, the distance grew longer, as though the hallway stretched with my desperation. I passed other figures. They did not look at me. Some wore student uniforms from decades past, their hems tattered, their shoes worn thin. Some were foreigners, tourists perhaps, their faces pale with exhaustion, lips whispering prayers in languages I did not know. A few carried books clutched to their chests, as if knowledge might protect them. All walked the same direction. None spoke. None reached the door. I tried to call out, but my voice vanished into the dimness, swallowed before it could touch another ear. Still I followed the exit sign, step after step, pulse quickening with the illusion of progress. At last, after what felt like hours, the door was before me. A heavy steel door, the kind that leads to stairwells. The red exit above it sputtered and hummed, but it glowed. It was real. I reached for the handle. Cold. So cold it burned my palm. I yanked it down anyway. The door swung open. Light spilled out. White, pure, blinding. My chest ached with relief. I stumbled forward, desperate to escape the oppressive dark. And then I froze. The room beyond was a classroom. The same classroom. The same blackboard, scarred and cracked. The same rows of desks, occupied by the same pale students. And at the front stood the teacher. Not the hollow figure I had seen before. Me. I was at the blackboard, chalk in hand, writing. My back was to the room, my posture rigid, my movements precise. Yet I felt it. I felt the chalk between my fingers, even as I stood outside the door. I staggered back, but my body inside the classroom kept writing. My voice echoed faintly, reciting lessons I could not stop. The students nodded in silence, absorbing each word, their eyes fixed not on the me at the board, but on me in the doorway. Two selves, bound in one moment, one teaching, one fleeing, neither free. The door slammed shut before I could scream. The exit sign above it fizzled, went black. The corridor was gone. Only darkness remained, vast and silent. I was alone, or so I thought. From the blackness came a sound. Not footsteps, not chalk. Breathing, close, behind me. I dared not turn. The air grew heavy, the darkness pressing against my skin. Something waited, patient, breathing with me, as though my lungs had been stolen and given to it. I whispered to myself, though my lips barely moved. There has to be a way out. But in that suffocating silence, the truth settled on me like ash. There is no exit. The 13th floor does not release. It consumes. One by one, each who enters becomes part of it. Student, teacher, shadow wandering endless halls. We repeat our roles until even memory frays. until our names are only chalk dust on slate. And then, when the story's told again, a new listener takes their place at the empty desk. The thought chilled me deeper than the dark, because I could feel it, faint but certain. Someone was listening, someone outside these walls. The desk in the last row was no longer empty. I did not dare look back to see who sat there. I already knew. It was you. The silence tightened, closing like a hand around my throat. The breath behind me grew louder, steady, inevitable. And in that final moment, the last truth revealed itself. The 13th floor never needed an exit, because once you know it exists, you are already inside. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.